What I really love to always start a conversation with, since I know so much of you from how you talk on YouTube, is who are you?
No pressure. Who am I? A voice from the sky.
I like that.
So at a higher level, I'm what they call a universal mirror, which means that everything is reflected in me. It makes me a very different tool in the universe than a typical spiritual teacher. That's number one. Number two, you know, I came into this life extrasensory with a lot of information about the universe. I couldn't fully plug into this physical dimension like most people can. And that would have made me a very good spiritual teacher. But what I endured in my childhood was 13 years of ritual trauma, like severe child abuse, bad. And I actually ran away when I was 19. And if I hadn't had that experience of extreme pain, there's no way that I could bridge the gap between what we could call non-physical perspective and a more temporal perspective, which is a big frustration, you know, that has been projected forth from mankind for so many years, is that these spiritual concepts that exist at a higher dimensional level are just so abstract. You know, so even if they could, quote unquote, help someone, it's really an unintegrated understanding that humanity has of spirituality. So my goal is to integrate that wider knowledge and higher dimensional information with this physical dimension, which we're participating in, because it's quite different. You know, the perspective you have as a physical human versus the perspective you have as your non-physical, non-temporal self is like night and day, you know? So there has to be a way to bring these two together.
And you're basically the bridge.
Yes.
Yeah, this is also something I can really relate to, because just from the way I look at your content, you're not focused on the light only. Like a lot of spiritual pages, they're only about the light, and I never see the shadow. But with you, I feel like there's definitely also the shadow part. So what is your personal perspective on the light side? Like, what is the general problem with it?
So first I need to say that polarity exists within the greater universe. So when we're talking about light and shadow, we're really not talking about good and bad. That's the misunderstanding that most people have. What we're talking about is the conscious and the unconscious. When I say this, most people only want to be conscious of what's good, right? They don't want to be conscious of what they would judge as bad, which is why usually you see more positivity falling into this light path, you know, the light workers path. I have an infinite amount of respect for both polarities within the universe because they represent objective truth. You can't have objective truth without both. The problem is that when we are valuing one over the other, not recognizing the value of both, we can get ourselves into some serious trouble both ways. Like in and of themselves can become a barrier to awareness and a barrier to progression. And what I'm noticing in the spiritual field most of all is that the people who are sort of, you know, latched onto this concept that they are on the light path, number one, they're not aware because they don't want to be. Number two, they're stuck in this constant cycle of bypassing. Number three, their spiritual practice becomes a coping mechanism. And because of it, it's like their shadow self is actually 100 times more dangerous. And they end up running into a huge wall with that because you can only take that so far before your shadow gets you, you know? Can't bury something in the basement and hope it stays there for all time and eternity and just dies out. It doesn't, because the energy of suppression makes things grow.
So what is the difference between somebody who is in complete denial or completely unconscious about his shadow versus somebody who integrated their shadow and then still is like all light? Like, wouldn't you say there's also people, like, for example, if I think about Ram Dass as an example, I feel like it feels different than the light people the light workers we're talking about. So what would you say is the difference?
What's the difference is a state of non-resistance. So the people who are like all about the light worker thing and are in a state of resistance, they're definitely against the negative. It's very much like a suppress, deny, avoid, don't go there type of energy. And the people who are more integrated, they don't have that resistance to either side. So it's like they see value in everything. So it's this much more flowy kind of, if that thing came up, no matter whether it's painful, there's something valuable there. I want to have awareness of it. I'm interested in manifesting. And so I'm going to use my mind as a tool of manifesting. And that means positive focus right now. It's like the energy is not against.
So would you say before the against level, is there also like this so unconscious level that you're completely ignorant? Like that's even before that, right? Like that's the first stage where you're not even aware, right?
Yep.
And I heard this already a few times now that, or at least that's how it also feels for me if I really go deep into my shadow, quote unquote, is the feeling that when we talk about the devil or devilry, that we're basically talking about the most unconscious parts about ourselves.
Yes.
Would you say that this could be the devil, like our ego completely taking over?
Yeah, basically. You can say that. But my worry is that language really limits us in a lot of ways, and we have to play with that. It's not like we can come up with an exact language that represents the full truth of this universe. But when we start to use words like that, and there's already an association with the devil of being bad, we've just made the ego bad by saying those words, which is why I hesitate there. Like, we can't make anything bad and integrate it. It's like a complete contradiction in terms.
Yes, it's basically in resistance. You're in resistance and you can't integrate it when you're in resistance of it.
Exactly. You should make your ego your best friend, is what you should do. And most people are like not going to do that with the devil.
When I hear that, then I'm like, yeah, this sounds correct. But then I'm also sometimes very aware of self-deception as like this voice in my head who is really fucking good in telling me exactly the story I want to hear. And then basically I'm repeating the cycle again in my best personal like, awareness, but it's actually not. It's almost like a trick again. That's where I'm like struggling sometimes. Like, when are you actually befriending a part of yourself to integrate it, and where are you just like basically taking an extra round because you're in denial or like deceiving yourself in certain ways? I don't know if that's too technical. No,
I love these types of in-depth questions that just, it's like from where I'm standing, that question isn't making much sense to me. Because there's like inherent in that idea, there's almost like an idea on your end that the integration of certain aspects of yourself is not a smart idea, or somehow takes you down a dark path. And that's the opposite of what I'm saying in every way.
What I mean is more that basically self-deception goes so far that you will say to yourself, I've integrated this part by actually didn't.
Okay.
You know, like that thin line between like where are you actually like really integrating something and where, I don't know, did you ever read Existential Kink?
No, I've got something for you that will help. So if you're walking down this path of awareness, the more aware you get, the less done you feel like things are. Like there's an attachment in the beginning of spiritual process where you're looking to get it done, right? You're looking to integrate this aspect and so you can be done. You're looking to adopt this new belief and so you can be done. And that right there is how the ego comes in the back door. So to be in an awakened space is to say it may never be done, but the better it gets, the better it gets. So it's not like you're looking to heal an entire layer or to completely integrate an aspect of self and then it's done. You don't know. It may come back up again. It may never come back up again. But if it does, it has value. You know, we've got it all managed. That we call that the internal micromanager. The internal micromanager that likes to keep everything under control by being like, we're done here. It's fundamentally in resistance to that process of uncertainty that happens as a result of different layers of the self rising to the conscious mind.
So basically what you're saying is there is never going to be this day where you're going to be fully healed. It's more like healing is like you will be remembering your truth faster. You will almost like there's a healing, like you go like this, and then but the extremes get smaller and smaller over the years, like because you become more aware of the dynamics and almost like see certain parts.
Yeah, I mean the process gets easier just like anything. If you're a professional surfer and that's what your livelihood is, you just get better and better and better at surfing waves. So what you watch with people who are in a state of enlightenment is they have this capacity to go between objective and subjective perspective to such a degree that it's like there's a non-resistance to these samsara waves, we call it, right? The up and down in life. They're not like, oh, no, you know, it's all right, here we go. There's value in this. There's value in this. There's value in this. There's value in, and so what you'll notice is more of an equilibrium because resistance always makes things 10 times more intensified because you're adding energy. Resistance is added energy to something. When we do this thing, you'll find often when you have an aspect of yourself that says, I've totally integrated that. What am I in resistance to is the question. I'm in resistance to having to work on it more, or I'm in resistance to the fact that that part could be a part of me in the first place, or I'm in resistance to the idea that, you know, whatever it is, we cannot be in an attitude of resistance in this life and feel good at the same time. It causes pain.
And would you say that there's a part in you who also wants that pain sometimes? Almost like there's like this, because this is the theory of this book, Existential Kink, which I think is interesting, that basically all those things you manifest where you're like, what the fuck? Like, why did I do that? That you basically say like, no, there's a part of you who wanted that. Like, it's not even just the shadow, that there's actually like a part of you who just likes to have this experience too.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. But where this gets kind of shady is that there's an idea that people enjoy pain and they don't. What is happening when somebody is intentionally creating these things that we from the external would look at and judge as bad, right? Is that they're in a lose-lose. They're between pain, and they're picking the less painful option, whether that's taking drugs, or whether that's painful relationships, or whether that's cutting oneself, or whatever. Risk-taking behavior, all of it is actually an attempt to mitigate worse pain. So I don't want people walking around thinking they're a sadist. You know, even if people who are genuinely sadistic, that sadism actually decreases their level of pain. So we can't say that people like pain.
It's basically like choose your own suffering, almost like, or choose your own pain a little bit more. Like instead of smoking weed, I'm going to switch into an abusive relationship or something like that, where I have like a different form of pain and it's distracting me in a different way, like in a weird sense.
We will use, if we're desperate, we will always use something to try to gain empowerment again. The aspects of self that like to protect the self will employ whatever strategy it takes to feel safer and to feel better. And sometimes from the outside, that looks very confusing. How could it make somebody feel better to commit suicide? How could it make somebody feel better to, you know, carve their own body up? How could it make somebody feel better to be screaming at the top of their lungs in a relationship? I mean, I could sit here and go down all, you know, this whole list. Of course, the self wants to be in a state of empowerment instead of disempowerment. Powerlessness is the most painful experience that a human being can actually have. So we're going to get out of it no matter what it takes. And that, you know, humans are ready to employ some pretty painful strategies to get out of that. But you see, like when I'm saying this, it's like, yes, we're always doing that because a part of us wants to do it. But the question is why? And when you look deep at that why, you can't say that people want pain anymore. You really can't.
Interesting, very interesting perspective, but it makes total sense. Another question related to that a little bit, because another one which is usually happening is that people start to find themselves in some sort of like victimhood. It's also a big word nowadays where terms like victim shaming are becoming more popular. And I'm just very curious about your personal opinion about victimhood. Is it like a complete no-no for spiritual growth, or is it almost like a necessary step in the process? Like, is there something before victimhood?
Ooh, I feel my heart rate raising. This is a personal button issue for me, right? On a lot of levels, you know, one as a spiritual leader, second as somebody who literally honestly could go in the public and be like, I am a victim, was child, you know? It's a complicated story because we cannot say that there are no victims. You don't get to watch a 14-year-old girl get raped and say there's no victims. There absolutely is victimization and victimhood in this world. Where this starts to get complicated, and by the way, why I'm saying that is it's very important to actually acknowledge the sensation of victimhood, which is, you know, that I had no power in this particular circumstance. That this is what that experience felt like. That this cause, you know, had this effect, and here I am living in my life with this painful meaning or whatever it is. To put the amount of pressure that a person who's been victimized, genuinely victimized, is already holding, to then come on top of that and say, don't be a victim. I am not okay with that in any way. But now we need to complicate this, because it's one thing to acknowledge those feelings and begin to heal those feelings, which means to have the opposite experience, right? And it's another thing to be stuck in victim mentality. Like, to be stuck in victim mentality actually is to employ a strategy of victimhood so as to gain power. And when we start to do that, we become stuck, just like with any other coping mechanism. That's number one. Number two, once a genuine victim has gone through these, you know, feelings, there's a trap there in sort of like, you know, staying powerless. And it's at that point that there needs to be a conversation. It's the hardest conversation you will ever have with someone. And it goes like this. Now what? Because you're fighting. Like, when you have been genuinely victimized, you are literally just fighting against the fact that it happened. The level of unfairness is crazy. What you have to swallow and accept is crazy. And the reality is most people are not going to save you. You're not going to get a rescue. And if anybody does side with you, it's with this energy of pity. They can't do anything about it. So you still have to, in your life, be like, okay, that happened. I can't undo it. This is where I am now. Now what? And that's where the genuine power comes in, but not before the pain of accepting that.
Yeah, this is also why it's so hard for so many people to even acknowledge that they were a victim. Like, that's what I'm starting to realize right now. Last year, I've read the book from Gabor Mate, Scattered Minds, about ADD. And it was the first time where I was actually acknowledging the fact that I had a fucking hard childhood. You know, it was like, oh, wow, there is a lot of sadness in me I've never really was able to feel. And that made me a certain way. And in a certain way, it was like a liberating. But now I'm also like back on this like awareness that this shouldn't determine who I am nowadays, right? It's like there's like like you said, you made it really good. Like, I think everybody really understood your point. So it's a big one for me to also hear that from you. Since we're already in this like very interesting topic of childhood trauma and childhood wounds and healing, there's two terms which get used a lot, and I feel like they have very similar dynamics, but maybe you can just explain your way of the differences between like shadow work and inner child work, inner child healing. So how would you connect those two? Or how are they depending on each other or complement each other?
When we talk about the human shadow, we're talking about what is unconscious. So shadow work is any process, any technique that helps the subconscious become conscious. Now, this is difficult, right? Because that could literally be parts work. That could be a process like I created for soul retrieval, which is completion process. That could be tarot. That could be inner child work. That could be meditations. That could be shamanic journeys. That could be left-hand writing exercises, somatic experiencing exercises, stream of consciousness exercises. There's so many things that fall into that category of making the subconscious conscious. Even going into a hypnosis session is shadow work. Inner child work is just one form of shadow work. And it sits on this premise that every person within themselves has this child self that they are not conscious of because they've suppressed, denied, and disowned and rejected it. And with that disowning and rejecting and denying of the child self, they have separated themselves away from a lot of their vulnerabilities and therefore a lot of their needs and also a lot of their strengths that would go along with that child self. And it is only through the reowning or the awareness of that inner child self that you can have access to both of those things. For example, have access to the truth about how you really feel in the world at your most primal level, what those deep fears are, and therefore what you can do to actually put yourself in a better state relative to your needs, the needs that make you the most vulnerable. And that adds up to getting a better life. Also, let's say that a quality of the child that you suppressed was curiosity, because every single time you got curious as a child, you got shamed. Your natural curiosity is buried within the context of your inner child. So by reowning that aspect, you are yet again allowing, your curiosity to come back into the world. And that's where that sense of wonder comes from that we lose in childhood. So inner child work is just one form of shadow work. And it's a very important form of shadow work specifically because, like I said, it is an aspect of self that is unconscious that holds such valuable aspects for the consciousness itself and therefore your life experience.
Yeah, so the broad term is shadow work, and then we have several different like tools. And you just said that one of the most important tools is definitely like reconnecting with your inner child and heal those wounds and own. Yeah, it's nice. When we talk about integration, this is also a big one. I used to study a lot about like psychedelic integration, but also shadow integration is such a buzzword nowadays. But now in terms of integration, like how are we actually integrating? Because for me, there's like a capital T nobody wants to hear, but it's like therapy. Like therapy, I see how therapy with somebody who's really fucking good can actually really help you integrate something, but it takes way more time than a little 2-week retreat or like a one coaching session. So how would you describe real, long-lasting shadow integration in your own words?
Okay, so if you think about your life as a tapestry, and there's a very beautiful picture there, right? Integration is to weave any aspect of self into that tapestry so that it adds to the overall picture. It is to create harmony in an overall piece, a sense of wholeness, a sense of oneness. When we have parts that are not integrated, it's like we've got a thread that's loose. And not only is that throwing the whole picture off, it is causing pain to the internal system. The process of integration, no matter what process you use, weaves it back in so that it benefits you. And that is ultimately where inner peace is born from. So like, that's one of those words that drives me nuts. You hear these people, especially in the spiritual field, there's so much focus on inner peace, inner peace, inner peace, right? And what the hell does that mean? Inner peace means, well, you must have a war going on inside if you need it. Okay, so if you've got a war going on, you've got two aspects of self or more that are against each other. So the process of integration is how do you get these two pieces of self to develop coherence with one another, to find an arrangement, an agreement where they benefit one another, where it's a win-win instead of a win-lose or a lose-lose, because let's just be honest. Inside a body, you can't have two parts playing a lose-lose game and win, can you? Yeah, so that's my definition of integration. And the reason that it's like very difficult to tell you how to integrate is because there are so many different processes, all of which are really fabulous tools to use for that. But there are also plenty of tools that take you in the opposite direction of that. And those are the ones I'm the most against, you know? There are plenty of tools which will make you feel better, but because they literally suppress, deny, and disown aspects of self. And that's a short-term game. But, you know, it's very prevalent. Instead of weaving it into the tapestry, you made some adjustment that made you think that you could get rid of it. And our attitude towards emotions is especially on board with that, you know, right now, which I'm trying to change in the world.
I have a question about emotions too, but just to like maybe go a little bit deeper into this whole integration thing, because I make an example, a personal example now. Maybe you have a personal advice for me. What I've discovered over the last, I would say, the last 2 years in my relationship especially, but also by healing a lot of my childhood wounds, is that I have a tendency to narcissistic behavior. So I would say there is narcissistic tendencies. I self-diagnose myself not as a complete like narcissistic, like how do you call it, disorder. It's like it's not a disorder, but it's there. And I'm starting to become really aware of it. And I read a lot about it, about like what can help and what can't help. And usually they say, like, if you're not a full-blown narcissist, you can just do a little bit of therapy, talk with somebody, go into the shame, go into like childhood trauma, and you will be able to almost like deconstruct the super ego, which is there, and like become a real self, like a real self. So this is like option one. Then what I heard, option two, what I tried over the few years is psychedelics, and I heard that this can even be counterproductive sometimes, because it's almost like reinforcing certain narcissistic stories, and you can actually become like almost like spiritual ego, very and it can definitely happen. I saw it. And now the third approach, which I'm right now trying to integrate, is the approach of like like not even like focusing too much on the self through Zen Buddhistic meditation practice, and actually realizing that there is no real self. For me, at least, that's the experience I'm getting through a lot of meditation. And my question is, do you have like a preference, or is there like something else you want to add to my thoughts? Because it's just very fresh and raw stuff I'm just dealing with the whole day, basically.
Narcissism in general, as a state of mind, I'm very aggressive on telling people that there is no such thing as a narcissism personality disorder. Like, so it's not like even on a spectrum that it can go there. Narcissism is, and ultimately codependency is a relationship style. It's a strategy for relationships, which means that a state of narcissism would fall into the category of a relational trauma. Specifically, the way that I like to explain this to people on the narcissism side, right, is that in a dysfunctional family, the underlying message in that family, it's not spoken. Usually the whole family's gaslit about it, but the underlying message is, it's every man for himself. So there's no genuine taking of the other person's best interests and caring about the other person's best interests. If it looks like that on the surface, it's really somebody doing something for another person because they have some, some personal kickback for that. So what that creates is that every person in the household has to employ some strategy to get their own personal needs met with the people around them. And usually that takes the form of some manipulative strategy. Now, the most manipulative strategy of all in a family system like that is actually the codependent. They figure out a way to let go of aspects of themselves and become like a chameleon kind of, in order to please someone so that that person who's then pleased meets their need. That's usually the golden child in the family. And they still have, it's a covert narcissist, right? The codependent's a covert narcissist because it's not like they're doing all this, they look like the family helper. They're not like, oh my God, mom, what do you need? Oh my God, dad, I'll be the perfect kid for them. They're actually doing that to meet their own needs. There's no other way. And usually the person who grows up to be what we would look on the outside and say, that's a narcissist right there. It more falls into the scapegoat category, where they could not find a way to please the people upon whom their needs depended. And so they fall into this trauma around feeling separated from the rest of the family members, feeling rejected, feeling almost like isolated. And so the energy in that home with that person is more like a reptile. Like a reptile has you and then that's it. Like, have fun, you're on your own. Very early, they learn, oh man, like I was born in a shark pit. I have one choice. Either I become like a little feeder fish that like sucks up against the bigger fish and pleases them so that I get some food. That's the codependent. Or I'm like, you know what? I'm another shark. I'm out for me and I got to think about me because no one else is going to think about me. And so it's like the strategy for staying safe is to close yourself off in what we call a narcissistic bubble. But you see how that was a whole relationship strategy. And so narcissism really does not become a problem unless you're in relationship to something. So my preferred method for dealing with any relational disorder is within the context of relationships. And like, you know, the tool like you suggested that you're using right now, that's a wonderful way of shifting your mind so as to be able to engage in relationships. But ultimately, you find your way out of narcissism by being in a healing relationship, where that relationship itself becomes an antidote to that MO in childhood, which was, it's every man for himself.
I couldn't make a better transition, Teal, because that's where we are right now with the questions of Serenia. Perfect, because relationships is such a big topic for us too, and obviously for you too, and it also helped us a lot, that content. Broader thing is obviously what you learned personally about yourself through relationships, but to go maybe into a little bit more detailed form of this question is, I'm just reading her question here. What has she learned are her needs / non-negotiables versus what she saw she needed to work on and heal?
Oh, that is a very big question. You know, actually, I am a little bit more extreme than most people on this relative to non-negotiables. But a lot of that is because of what I prioritize relative to my career. Most people in the world are not dealing with a giant international career purpose mission thing, you know, something that's so much larger than them. And that makes this much more difficult, right? Because there's fewer people that can fit into this lifestyle that I'm living. And it's a very non-traditional dynamic, especially regarding masculinity and femininity, much to my dismay. God, it's like, is she wanting me to like go through certain non-negotiables?
No, I think it's more about the fact, what you learned in the dynamics, like when to discern what is actually here for me to grow versus where am I maybe too proud, or like maybe my too attached to certain ideals, you know what I mean? That's how I understand the question. Like
genuinely wanting something, you know? When you're genuinely wanting something, those non-negotiables that go along with that thing that you are wanting are very, very important. Where we run into a lot of issues is when we have juxtaposed desires. That's something that we have to sort out for ourselves, right? Because sometimes those juxtaposed desires like make it so that we're sending mixed messages to people and we're like putting energy in two directions, and that can't happen. But let's pretend that you have like a very, very, very strong desire. You're not going to heal yourself out of that. It's more likely that when you do, you know, all this integration work, it'll make it more intense, in fact. So you'll be in a situation where you have no option but to go in that direction with your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And so we need to get in the habit of really questioning ourselves around desire, because what I notice is that people who are asking that question, right, that she's asked, they're usually people who make an enemy of their desire, especially in a relationship. You know, the relationship starts to come up with issues because there's some juxtaposed desire. And so it's very tempting to be like, well, I really want this relationship to work so bad. And so I have to think that maybe this thing I want is really not right. And it's maybe something that comes from trauma. And maybe I should, you know, be able to heal myself out of it, or, you know, have a personal growth experience out of it so that I'm more aligned with this person. And that's where it comes down to personal desire. You know, if you are somebody who's like, you know, I have narcissistic tendencies, I should heal them, even though what I really want is to go, be by myself around the world and be able to do whatever I want whenever I want to. You can't work with that. Do you see? I mean, we can work with it, but like you can't really work with that, because what you're really wanting is this thing that's in the opposite direction of where I would take you if what you're really wanting, I mean, genuinely wanting, is to master relationships. But if you're a person who says, I genuinely want to, not a should, want to master relationships, and I have this thing opposing it, then we can go to town on that with self-development and healing all day long. But that first step is that personal truth around what you're really wanting, so that the work then is how to line you up with that, how to close that gap between where you are and that. Does that answer the question kind of?
Yes, I think that's a really good answer. It's a really good answer, especially because that's exactly where we are also right now. It's about like this whole truth. Like if you're going for capital truth, you will create the best situation in the future. It's maybe not going to be the easy decision in the now, but it's definitely going to be the better decision in the long.
That's for damn sure. But I don't want to like gaslight everybody, because it's one of the hardest things in the world to do relative to this personal truth aspect, is that to admit to your personal truth, there are consequences for that. I actually have a video that's coming out very soon here in the next few weeks about this, you know, the fact that it's so tempting not to look at truth because there are always consequences that come with truth. It's just I'm wishing that people saw that the consequence for really landing in their truth may be painful short term, but like you said, in the long term, it's always going to lead you to whatever it is that you want. But when you're in a relationship where you really genuinely want to be with the other person and there's an attachment there, attachment is a very powerful thing for a physical human. So whenever a personal truth might oppose or threaten or put risk into the element of attachment, it's very difficult for people to be truthful instead of to choose attachment. Because in terms of your system, how that's registering is that you're choosing to risk your own survival. Attachment is survival for a physical human. I don't care what age you are. So we're basically saying, I'm going to risk death for the sake of this personal truth. That's a big ask. And usually people only will admit to their personal truth when it feels like it's a survival versus survival. Like it has to get so bad that I'm screwed either way, which I wish didn't have to be the case.
I think it's sometimes really also a big word, truth, because there's also different parts of you who sometimes want different things, right? And then we're back in this whole, what is the relative truth to the objective truth to the absolute truth, if there's even something like an absolute truth.
Yep, and that is the work of your life. That is the work of awareness, and that is, if you're really genuinely on the path of spirituality, that is a quest that will never end.
Yeah, I'll just go on with the second question. How much of our inner child healing is dependent on the partner we choose? For example, if getting rewounded over and over.
I think it's interesting. So the question is interesting because sort of inherent in this is another teaching for people to have relative to the emotional self. It is interesting to me, understand very quickly that it's not possible to heal a broken leg when you're in a war zone. Like if you got a doctor sitting there with you on a battlefield who's trying to put everything back together and putting the cast on, and then another bomb goes off and it's damn, the cast I just put on is off again. It's easy for us to be like, oh, that doesn't work. You have to first bring somebody to a place of safety. But we don't seem to understand this on an emotional level. And a lot of times we leave ourselves in these places which are not conducive to emotional healing, and yet we think that we should be able to do that. No, I should have the fortitude to be able to, love myself the way I am, even though I'm around this person who constantly, is ripping me down or whatever it is. I should be able to perfectly, take somebody else's best interest, regardless of whether they're smacking me all day long. And there is a place that we want to gravitate towards in the course of our practice where we have enough resources inside that we're less and less dependent on the external to be a certain way for us to still, have a sense of personal empowerment. You will always be influenced by others. It's unhealthy not to be. But to be completely powerless in a relationship is not particularly healthy. But that being said, why would you do that to yourself would be my question to somebody. Why would you do that? Why would you leave yourself in a circumstance on an emotional level that is basically like a contraindication to whatever it is you're trying to heal? And I have to take this very seriously, especially when I'm working with girls who are trying to heal from abuse, but they're still living in households where there is serious abuse going on. There is literally only so much we can do before you get a person out of that environment. Why? Because the protector aspects of self exist for an important reason. Those protector elements of ourself get us in a lot of trouble in the future, right? Let's say that you've got the part of self that whenever it's in a dangerous situation just sort of dissociates. You can see how in a relationship that's going to get you in a lot of trouble. You can't really have a successful relationship in your adulthood when every time somebody goes to have a conversation with you, you're dissociating, right? But if I look at a person who's, let's say they're still living at home and that environment is literally so painful that there's a reason for them to dissociate, that makes just as much sense to try to pull them out of it in the context of that environment as it does to walk up to a soldier that's in the Middle East who's in the middle of a war zone. And I'm like, sweetie, you really need to start working right now on your emotional connection to other people. It's really important right now. What am I talking about? This guy's about to lose half his platoon. I'm not going to tell him in that type of in that situation, it's an important time to be emotionally connected, right? So it's we need to start to see healing within the context of our environment. And so your partner absolutely has something to do with your healing. But you'll notice that where this gets complicated is that because we are coming from such an unconscious place, we often end up in situations where the partner is essentially antagonizing our own traumatic patterns, in part to bring them up. So the question is then, can we shift this relationship so that the other becomes a healing agent, or is that person becoming the healing agent going to re-traumatize them? This is the biggest problem, honestly, for this I see with attachment issues, specifically avoidant and insecure attachment, because those two people gravitate to each other like nobody's business. And often, what it requires for a person who's in a pattern of insecurity to be in a space of security in a relationship is actually traumatizing, re-traumatizing of enmeshment to the avoidant. So there's a contraindication there. And actually, a lot of therapists won't even touch it. They won't even touch that, like a relationship where they have, the person who's an avoidant and the person who is an anxiously attached, because it's like both of them have to hurt in order to be in the relationship so badly. It's like much better to have an insecure person with somebody who's secure, who can be like, look, it's okay right now. I'm really not going to go away. I'm available to you. For the avoidant to say that brings up all of that initial, like, oh no, I'm getting engulfed type of stuff. So you start to see this cyclical sort of red zone stuff happening like crazy.
The next question is pretty personal, so you don't have to answer it if you want, if you don't want to. She asks if you're currently in a relationship or if you're open for a relationship, and what are you looking for in order to commit to somebody? Like, what are you basically the qualities you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm in a long-term relationship. It's very difficult for me, the qualities that I need for a partner versus most people, because of the difference of what I'm doing here on this earth and what that means for relationships. For example, more like a politician, it's not really possible for me to be in a relationship with a guy who has his own life, because what that means is I don't have a partner. I'm not one of those people who's interested in meeting up once in a blue moon on a beach somewhere to have fun. That's not my thing. Like when it comes to partnership, it's about very, very deep, intimate connection where we're sharing a life. And so my partners are essentially put in the position, it'd have to be a truth that their path is my path. You know what I mean? And for them, not for me, not like they're giving up their life for this life. Like they feel like their life is, to essentially join on board with this and to do this with me. That means flying around the world with me. That means we're having a complicated community set up with me. And where it gets very complicated, obviously, is that there's still this male-female dynamic, and it's very difficult. You think it's difficult to contain most women? Try a world leader. Try that. Yeah, but it's like I still like those qualities. I'm a typical female that way. It's not like. No, it's not like I want a polarity flip dynamic where I'm like, I'm going to be the leader. You're going to be the follower. You're going to be the support. I'm going to be the provider. I don't like that. So it's about how to master a relationship where I have the amount of power that I have and the amount of purpose that I have at the same time as being able to be contained. So the perfect template for that, there's two templates that I've come up with. The first is, if you ever watched Fifth Element, Lilu. Do you remember Lilu?
Oh my God, she's so cool.
Yeah, so like
I love that movie.
Lilu is like this all-powerful being, but at the same time, like you can see her fragility. And so you can feel in her and sense this need for this container. But that container has to be a person that knows when to do this with it and knows when to do this with it. And the second analogy that I like to use is like a racehorse. If you look at the team that's around a racehorse, you've got the person who's, supporting the horse by feeding it. You've got the person who's like brushing its coat. You've got the owner who's like fiercely fighting for what's in the best interest of that horse. But when the horse goes out on the track, it's like, whoa, damn, And then at the end of the race, back into that sort of safe container that's created by the groom and that's created by the owner and that's created by the trainer and all of that. And so I have to model my relationships after that because of the dynamic in my life. And it's not easy.
Yeah, I believe you. I don't know if you ever heard about the red pill. I was forced to research that whole thing a little bit about like hypergamy and how males are and how women are. And for me, it's so funny to just see that, because there is, for me, in this structure, you are basically on purpose. Like when I look at you and how you talk, this is your purpose, and this is a very masculine trait, if you want to say it like that. But you're a woman, So I think a lot of guys are very insecure that women are like you exist. Like I really believe that.
Yeah, they're very insecure about that. What's worse, though, is that like women like me become an absolute beacon for men who have trauma in their childhoods around the absence of having a mommy. And so a lot of the men that come in, instead of providing containment, they're drawn to me because they lacked the leadership and they lacked the support themselves, and they lacked the being told what to do in childhood and feeling secure and stuff. And so it's very, very easy for me to unintentionally get into a flip dynamic, which makes me miserable. You know, like if a guy doesn't want to take responsibility, what's better to go for than a woman who seems like she's got everything under control?
Yeah, and it's also, like I said, it's also something I start to realize more and more with myself is this purpose, this dominance, all those like masculine traits, they still need some sort of like ventile. Like you still have to have the other energy, like call it an alpha or omega or whatever you want to call it. But it's like that sense that there is two different ways of experiencing yourself.
Yes, there definitely is. But this is like, this is honestly, if you want my honest truth, this is one of the most painful aspects of my life personally, is the fact that my life purpose calls very powerfully for decidedly masculine traits. And it's actually very easy for me. I mean, like easy to within an inch of my life easy, like already mastered easy. Wish I was a guy easy, right? But it's weird because as a female, when I go into those energies, if I spend all my time there, I am in so much pain. Physically and everything. It's like I'm going metallic is the way that I'd like to put it. It gets tight. And honestly, I have had a lifelong struggle with my womb. I mean, it's hard to even breathe talking about it. It's been so bad. So it's like there's a somatification of the over masculinization. And so it puts somebody like me who very powerfully knows I'm on the right path, that I should be on, in a position to make the right decisions relative to this whole aspect of myself, which does get damaged by this. But it's weird. It's an interesting conversation, you know, which I've been having a lot lately, because it very much, I feel like I'm being called into a position, especially in a masculine world, which was made for men, which runs counter to my femininity. And yet I see myself as a major advocate for the preservation of genuine femininity, which is going down the toilet right now. So it's like, it's almost like I have to make a move against my own femininity. Take that with a grain of salt, because I never do anything against myself. I always get aspects of myself on board with it. But it's like my femininity is almost in a self-sacrifice mode for the sake of being able to put a message out there that allows other women to preserve their femininity.
I still feel like I saw your movie, I think on Gaia, where you were painting in that movie. So there's still some sort of like energy where you can cultivate, where you're probably you're probably enjoying that part about your life when you're painting, right?
Yeah.
When I listen to you, I feel I can like resonate a little bit, because I also feel sometimes that the incentive for me to go into my feminine are very low. Like there's not a lot of like real incentive besides the fact that I feel like there is a curiosity. There is always this, also you can just break it down, instead of like masculine and feminine, let's just say like there's like this rational and there's like this emotional side. And some people say like it's either or some people are almost like evolving into this like, I'm the successful CEO, or like I make all this money, I have all this success. For me, it was bodybuilding, for example, and business. And then at some point you go into the complete other extreme of like become this completely intuitive person who's always just connected to their emotions. And basically it's almost like a little bit like complacent at some point. Like there's no discipline. And I'm questioning the dynamics of if there's maybe going to be a Teal Swan, maybe in 10, 20 years, who is almost like going into this like 50-50 at some point. Like, do you think that there's a point where you're going to allow yourself, I mean, if there's pain, obviously maybe not, if there's so much pain involved with it, do you see that even as a possible manifestation?
There's a point at which I have to relate to people, and a point at which I can no longer relate to people, and it needs to be that way. You know, there needs to be a place where we understand that Teal Swan is not the same as other people on this planet. So if I choose to integrate to the degree where there is a lack of polarity, or we should say so much of both that I end up almost non-gender, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right step for humanity at this time, because I do not trust humanity to go at that from an aspect of integration rather than in an attitude of resistance. And I'm watching a crisis within genders in society that has made me a powerful advocate of men really stepping into divine masculine and women really stepping into divine feminine, and not focusing on women developing the male and males developing the females. You know, when I work with partners, like let's say I was to work with you, I would not have a conversation with you about developing your femininity in any way. It would literally be like, all right, you're a man who needs to provide containment. In this particular situation, you're not providing good containment if you can't feel compassion. So we're going to start working on compassion. And whether or not I would sort compassion into the female category in life or not, it's what you need to do to be in the divine masculine at this moment.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I'm going to simplify it this way. What you will notice is that in order to be powerfully in the divine masculine or the divine feminine, is that you will have to develop traits that you could sort into the opposite category, but it'll be in a way that it adds to your masculinity or it adds to your femininity. So if I am working with a man who powerfully wants to provide containment for his woman, compassion, which is a female quality, doesn't make him more female. Compassion makes him better at containment. Therefore, it adds to his divine masculinity. And so I'm wanting men to understand that, rather than focus on, I need to, as a man, develop my feminine aspect.
I can definitely agree with everything you said. For me, the only thing where I'm still having like this open loop is the sexuality part. How much more fun could I have? Like, my issue is that I'm just naturally extremely dominant, and I'm not even like forcing that. It's just, some people give me sometimes feedback that it's really hard to tell me something and like to speak up for me, or like that I'm taking up a lot of space. And Serenia is like the opposite. So we have like this like crazy connection, and everything works fine. But then there's sometimes a part of me who thinks like, how would it be if I could also surrender? So what I'm like thinking of, what could be interesting, is just me being able to surrender or even submit. You know, like to learn this in order to have even more pleasure maybe at some point, just because there is like this like switch you can do. And then also just because one of my things I do is I'm very expansive. Like I like to think that there's so many experiences out there to get if you just like let go of control. That's why I'm also really deep into psychedelics, where I feel like I'm not just taking them to heal, I actually take them to like confront consciousness in all different like aspects.
Again, I'm going to challenge that that's innately female, because if you look at a martial artist, I mean, would you consider a martial artist feminine?
Not at all.
And yet they have the capacity to completely surrender when they need to, because even the quality of surrendering can fit into, you know, masculine qualities.
And I think that it actually, so that's what a woman told me. She's like, if you basically been on the other side of energies, like if you can submit, you also know how to be a better dominator, for example. That's also like another really interesting. There we go. So dynamic.
That's exactly what I'm saying. You can literally, and without saying I'm developing my feminine aspect, you can say I'm stepping more into divine masculine, because I would like to better pleasure a woman. I'm only going to know how to do that if I fill in the blank. So even that could fit into the category of intellectualism, which is masculine, right? Wisdom's feminine, intellect masculine. That seems quite smart to me.
All right. Another question we have here is, what has been the most helpful or responsible for your personal healing process? Big question again.
What has been the most responsible for my personal healing?
Or like the most helpful?
Having community and my son. I mean, it's not a secret that, unlike everyone else, my trauma is interpersonal trauma. So the most healing aspect and the most profound changes have come within the context of relationship. Huge changes have happened as a result of being a mother. That has changed the game in life. You just can't, I mean, it's a different life, you know? I mean, people say you can't understand what it's like having a kid until you have a kid. And it's not until you have a kid that you get that, you know? It changes everything. It changes the way you see everything. You know, if you're going to be a good parent, if that's your commitment, there's no possible way to not take the best interest of this thing into your life at all moments of the day. So it's like the universe has essentially handed you you have to find a win-win to be happy. It's interesting how children have this capacity to reconnect you just so strongly with all the wonderful things you've lost, especially the way that life is seen, you know, and like it's a purity that I think is rare to find anywhere. So my son has been a huge transformative force in my life. Second to that is the fact that I decided to go for intentional community, which is a fast track to enlightenment, believe me. It's like everything on an amplification dynamic. I mean, it's everything. It's like the worst and the best all wrapped into one, and everybody reflects everybody else. So you can't escape yourself if you tried, and it does not work unless you can consider all people. Keeping everybody in alignment at all moments of the day is almost impossible. So you're walking this line between personal empowerment and what you will do so as to take responsibility for how other people feel. Yeah. At the same time, it's like, you know, more needs have been met than ever before. So it's both the most painful and therefore, you know, the path of most growth at the same time as being the best decision I've made relative to my own personal needs, you know, my personal development that leads to happiness.
That's beautiful. How many people are you living with, if I can ask?
Right now, 8, but usually it's like between 9 and 12. And sometimes in the high points, depending on whether I'm in Costa Rica or not, it's 22.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a comparable example maybe, but the first time I realized that for myself was actually at Burning Man. How important community can be, how people can be responsible for mirroring or not mirroring certain things. Like if you're ashamed of being naked, Burning Man will bring it out of you in like 10 minutes. Like in 10 minutes, you will never be ashamed of being naked anymore because nobody cares about your dick there or about anything. Like it's just like, and that's faster than every coaching or any other thing. It's just like literally realizing, hey, look, there's people out there and they can like hold you, they can bear you, and you can bear them, and that's medicine. It's real good stuff.
It's also what's most natural for a physical human.
Yeah.
I laughed my ass off because the other day I got in a conversation on an interview about traditional households. And I was like, wait. Let's talk tradition, okay? Because tradition to me, we get into shaky grounds because tribe is tradition for humanity, not a single family household.
Yeah, one of the last questions, also a really interesting one actually for me. Do you have a daily spiritual practice?
Okay, so this is always so hard. So many people want to know this about me. And like what's really difficult is that I'm one of those people who really understands that me personally, I can't reach a state of success unless I'm riding these tides. So while I'm one of the most disciplined people I've ever met, I mean, like literally, like I can probably count on 2 fingers people that are as disciplined as me. That being said, part of that discipline is to ride those currents. And what that means is that I can't have like a set way that I do things every day. Not one of those people. If I wake up and the current is I need to start writing, I start writing immediately. If that current is I need good food, then I'm going to start cooking. So you're going to see like a lot of fluctuation in what it is that I feel like is right to do in a given moment. And this has made me wildly successful, like to the point where I will sometimes wake up and be like, I have 100% intuition right now that we need to go to this city. I don't know why, whatever, but I'm going to go. And it like turns into this amazing experience where it's exactly what you needed, whatever. So obviously for my job, a prerequisite is to be able to follow those currents. And so I do. So there's not like a set regiment, you know, I've just got like a whole box full of tools that I employ whenever I feel the need for it. It's much more like a dance within myself, you know? Yeah.
Can you name some of the tools, like just stuff which comes to your mind first?
First of all, I'm doing shadow work every single day. So that means I do parts work like crazy. I do meditations, all kinds of different meditations, from somatic meditations to transcendental meditations to breath work to medicine work to working with sound healing. It's ridiculous, really. I'm one of those people that takes my own medicine, like a lot.
Yeah, that's what I always say when you do stuff like you do, or like also what I do. I mean, I also talk about a lot of those things. It's almost like you frame yourself every day to be that person. It's almost like we dug each other a really good pit in which we are basically like almost like forced to be that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But the only place that I'm not really, I'm a little bit flowy with food, but not really. I'm like one of these people that's so sensitive. My food regimen is actually probably the most structured thing about my life.
How do you eat?
We can have a conversation, you probably have before, about this idea of like vibrational alignment. A lot of people who are into spiritual stuff, they ask the question, well, if I was in a good enough state, would it matter if I ate junk food? Like you'll hear that a lot, right? Why, this is like a hypothetical conversation because it would never happen, because in the time-space reality based off of law of attraction, you actually could not share space with a food that vibrated at a lower frequency at all. Like if you were in a high one. So like we could have the conversation, but it's all hypothetical because it wouldn't happen. The higher your consciousness gets, the more sensitive you get to different vibrations, especially the ones you're putting in your body. So at this point, feeding me is impossible, right? I'm vegan, lectin-free, 0 sugar, 0 alcohol, 0 coffee. I'm like a purist to within an inch of my life. So I can't like eat anywhere, which is sad because I'm like such a foodie. So there's so much energy in our community that goes into making food, preparing it, where it's sourced from, and what we can eat. And that's basically the only way to maintain homeostasis within myself at this point. Because like if I put something in my body that is not supposed to be there, the reaction would blow your mind.
I can definitely relate to a lot of that stuff. I mean, when I talk about junk food for me is actually a vegan burger too. Like I'm also vegan for 8 years now. and I would never go back. But it was still a vegan burger, and it was still eaten in a fast pace because I had this interview and I had to like really be fast. So it's an interesting point when you say the vibration, because usually I never go to this restaurant if I have time and if I'm like in a good mood, you know. I go there very rarely, and it's usually when you don't have time or when you're like, you know, like so there's definitely some truth in that. Like the better you feel about yourself, the more precious your body becomes, the more you feel like this is actually a temple. And I just realized like last year, like by the end of the year, that after 7 years your whole body gets restored. So now I feel like I'm completely like built on like suffering free materials.
It changes everything. Like when you start to become more conscious, do more shadow work, it's like you can't put things in your mouth the same way anymore, because you can look at it. I can look at a salad leaf and tell you exactly what has been done with that leaf, and whether the farmer, you know, cared or not, or whether that's been sprayed, or whether it's been, you know, sort of like discarded and transported painfully. The whole frequency of that leaf changes. It's like there's some workability, but then like you pass that threshold and your body's like, yeah, you know, we're reacting to a suffering food. And the entire food industry is set up for that.
So I have one last question here, a little bit a longer one, but I think it's an interesting one too. It's also from Serenia. She says that she feels like you are really valuing authenticity. Like that's what she feels. I can agree with that. And then she says, some people say we are truly being authentic when we are speaking from our higher selves in truth and love. And others say anything that you think and feel is what is authentic, even if it's the voice of the ego disconnected from the higher self or spirit. How do you view living truly authentic? So to who we are and not who we think we are.
Oh, I love that question. I will make a statement that you can only be authentic to the degree that you know yourself. So before we get to the place where we know ourselves, that means all of the aspects enough to arrive at what the objective truth is of ourselves. Then you have to work with whatever is in the moment, right? So like if that, what is in the moment right now is that I'm feeling angry. I can tell you your what we would call the higher self isn't feeling angry right now. It's not having the same physiological experiences. So technically your truth would be both. So when we get to authenticity is when we can have the capacity to accommodate both to the degree that we can, you know, say, you know, here in my physical incarnation, this experience is making me frustrated. At a higher level, I can see there's some benefit, but one does not cancel out the other. See, but like I can't require most people to be at that level. So when I say I want you to be authentic, it means I want you to work with whatever it is that you don't want to admit to right now, you know?
That's very precise. And it's also a really good answer because it means that you're basically integrated. You're also having an integral worldview, because that's what it also comes all down, is that you realize that, yeah, everything is relative, but at the end of the day, there is still suffering and pain.
Yeah.
And you can still value to have less of that.
Yes.
Very helpfully saying that we can still objectively measure certain, like for example, with veganism, like we can definitely say that less suffering on this planet will probably be a good idea. You know, it's like, it's not really hard. But yeah, it's then there's also obviously other philosophical dilemmas where because we are we're such a big group of people now that it's like geopolitics. It just doesn't work because we're still in this like tribal, our emotions are built for 100 people, not for 1 million of people. So there's like, it's almost like the system itself is the problem in which we are right now, right?
Oh yeah. That's why most of my focus is oriented in the direction of changing that system. Because remember how earlier we had that little conversation about how important it is to heal within the context of a healing environment? Unfortunately, society itself opposes healing for humanity. We have not created a society that is conducive to human health. So it's like we're going to do the best we can on an individual level, but then those of us that see these problems in the greater world, we've got to start to change society to be more conducive with health so that people can, you know, so they don't have to be healing despite.
Thank you so much for those brilliant answers. It was really, really interesting talking to you, Teal, and I appreciate everything you do. Like I see you and I know that you're coming from a place of like, authentic, you know, like there's it's authentic, and it's like you said, it's like pure. Like you really want to change something. Like you really believe that, and that makes it really really nice to follow you and just be a part of this expression of consciousness.
Yes. Thank you. It was wonderful to have this conversation.